The woman was waiting by the river for her boyfriend when she suddenly heard a strange noise behind her. She quickly turned around and was shocked to see a wild zombie not far away. Upon closer inspection, she realized the zombie even had what looked like Sharingan eyes. Edna was so terrified by this sight that she started backing away. The zombie noticed her and began stumbling after her. In a panic, she rushed back to her car, but before she could even roll up the window, the zombie had reached the side of the car and was reaching in with its claws to attack her. Edna had no choice but to jump out of the car and run for her life, heading toward the other side of the river to find her boyfriend. But in her frantic state, she tripped and fell into the river. Just then, her boyfriend George, accompanied by a local villager, arrived just in time. Edna quickly ran to her boyfriend's side and told him everything that had just happened. But when they turned around, there was nothing to be seen. George thought Edna was joking at first, but after hearing her description, the villager confirmed that such a person did exist. However, the villager added that the man had drowned a week ago, and it was possible that it was another vagrant. After hearing this, Edna and George didn't take it too seriously and continued on their way, heading to Edna's sister's house. Not knowing the area well, they ended up driving around in circles until it was already getting dark. Meanwhile, Edna's sister, Katie, was hiding out in a warehouse, secretly getting high behind her husband's back. But before she could even get started, she heard a strange noise. She followed the sound and was horrified to see a zombie slowly approaching from the darkness. Terrified, Katie quickly grabbed a tool and smashed the window, jumping out just in time to avoid being caught. She ran straight to find her husband, who was out filming flowers and plants. He suddenly heard her cries for help and turned to see his wife being attacked by a big guy. As a man, how could he just stand there? Without a second thought, he rushed over and shoved his wife aside, ready to fight the zombie. But of course, he was no match for it, and after just one encounter, he was immediately knocked down. Katie, on the other hand, stood there like a bystander, not lifting a finger to help. Her husband managed to grab a rock and threw it at the zombie, but it barely made a dent. Katie, however, just kept watching, totally indifferent. It wasn't until she saw her husband being strangled to death by the zombie that she finally reacted, screaming as she ran for her life. Luckily, Edna and George showed up just in time. The headlights of their car scared the zombie away, and Katie narrowly escaped with her life. The next morning, the police arrived at the scene after receiving a report. But after investigating, they started to suspect Katie. The sheriff didn't believe a word of Katie's story about a zombie. In fact, they found some white powder at her house and suspected that Katie had been hallucinating from drug use, which led her to kill her husband. Given that Katie had a history of substance abuse, and the couple often fought over it, the sheriff was convinced that Katie was the one who had committed the murder. However, Edna was sure that Katie was telling the truth because she had seen the zombie herself. But despite her insistence, the sheriff decided to take Katie to the station for questioning, unless he saw the so-called zombie with his own eyes. While Edna and George were trying to figure out what to do next, they happened to notice the camera in the police officer's hand. Katie's husband had been taking pictures when he was attacked, so it was possible that the camera had captured the zombie's image. Seizing the opportunity when the officers weren't looking, Edna and George quietly stole the film from the camera and took it to a Photoshop to develop the pictures. While waiting for the photos to be developed, George received a call from the police station. Katie had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. Without wasting any time, the two of them rushed to the hospital. Fortunately, Katie wasn't seriously injured, but while George was wandering around the hospital, he noticed something strange. A nurse had been scratched by a newborn baby. How could a defenseless baby be so violent? The doctor explained that this wasn't the first incident of its kind. Several babies from the same town had shown unusually aggressive behavior. George immediately recognized the town the doctor was talking about. It was the same one they had passed through on their way here. The day Edna encountered the zombie, George had stopped at a farm in that town to ask for directions. It turned out that the farm was using a machine that emitted radiation to eliminate pests. Could this be connected to the strange events happening now? The doctor, intrigued by this, immediately decided to visit the farm with George. However, after asking the staff there, they were told that the radiation from the machine only affected the nervous systems of microorganisms and insects. The machine had been rigorously tested and would have no impact on humans, who had evolved long ago. The doctor didn't quite agree with them, however, because newborns also have undeveloped nervous systems, so it's possible that the babies could be affected, but it would need further testing to be sure. Soon, the photos Edna and George had sent for development were ready, but unfortunately, there were no zombies in the pictures. despite Edna insisting that she had truly seen the zombie, the same one from the newspaper article about the dead homeless man. George remained skeptical. To ease Edna's concerns and put her mind at rest, George decided to visit the cemetery where the homeless man's body was buried and check for himself. What they didn't know was that their every move was being monitored by the police. When they reached the crypt where the body was stored, George began opening each coffin one by one to check. At first, everything seemed normal until he opened the last coffin and found that the body was gone. Could the missing body belong to the homeless man? Before they could make sense of what had happened, they noticed large amounts of blood smeared on the walls. George climbed up the ladder and was horrified to find the body of the cemetery caretaker. Just then, the door to the crypt slammed shut, and the zombie appeared right in front of them. Seeing this, George finally believed Edna's story, but they had no way out. As the zombie lunged at Edna, George quickly grabbed a metal rod and tried to deliver a blow to the zombie. However, not only did the zombie remain unscathed, but it turned and began walking toward George. George tried to strike again, but the zombie shoved him to the ground. Realizing he was no match for it, George had no choice but to flee. Surprisingly, the zombie didn't chase after him. Just when they were both confused, the zombie walked over to a nearby corpse, and with its blood-soaked hands, it tapped lightly on the corpse's eyelids. It then opened another coffin and repeated the same action. To their shock, the body inside the coffin also turned into a zombie. In a moment of crisis, the two of them spotted a hole in the wall and immediately scrambled up the ladder to escape. But just as Edna was safely out, two zombies grabbed hold of George's ankle. After a tense struggle, George managed to break free from their grip. Meanwhile, the police who had been following Edna finally caught up with her. But just as George climbed out, he saw a zombie holding a cross chase after them, and turned to find two more zombies closing in. With no way out, the three of them had no choice but to hide in a nearby building. The police, armed with guns, immediately opened fire on the zombies, only to discover that the zombies couldn't be killed. Now, the only option was to hunker down and wait. After a moment of calm, George finally realized that the machine at the farm was the cause of all this. The radiation from the machine affects the primitive nervous systems of infants and recently deceased individuals, turning them into bloodthirsty zombies. And these zombies have the ability to awaken other corpses through their blood. If they were allowed to continue unchecked, the consequences would be catastrophic. Just as George finished speaking, the zombies began forcing their way into the building. Worse still, one of the officers had accidentally dropped the walkie-talkie outside. With the door about to be breached, it seemed only a matter of time before the zombies got in. In an attempt to contact his teammates, the officer had no choice but to risk going outside to retrieve the walkie-talkie. However, as soon as he stepped out, a zombie swung a tombstone at him, breaking his leg. He never even got close to the walkie-talkie before he met his demise. Meanwhile, the zombies resumed slamming the tombstone into the door, and the two inside were terrified, helplessly watching as the zombies broke in. With the zombies closing in, they were completely trapped. In a moment of desperation, George grabbed an oil lamp from the wall and threw it to the ground, hoping to slow the zombies down. To his surprise, he discovered that the zombies were highly afraid of fire. The flames quickly surrounded all the zombies, reducing them to ashes. Taking advantage of the chaos, the two escaped and decided to split up. Edna went to the police station to tell the sheriff everything, while George headed to the farm to shut down the radiation machine. However, the farm staff refused to believe him, insisting that he should trust in science. What's worse, to increase the efficiency of pest control, they had turned the machine's power up to 5 kilometers. This meant that within this radius, both freshly dead bodies and newborn babies would undergo mutation. In a panic, George took a hammer to the machine, smashing it in frustration. Meanwhile, the staff rushed to the police station to report the situation. As expected, the radiation had indeed turned Katie's husband into a zombie. By nightfall, the sheriff and his team arrived at the scene. Seeing the dead officers and the charred bodies, the sheriff, completely confused, believed that George and Edna were twisted murderers. Back at the police station, Edna arrived only to find it overrun by zombies. Frozen in fear, she didn't notice one zombie creeping up behind her. Though she got scratched by the zombie, she was lucky enough to escape with her life. Before the zombie could catch up again, she quickly jumped into a car and sped off, even running over the zombie on her way out. While fleeing, Edna ran into George, who was returning from the farm. After hearing about the situation at the police station, George hurriedly took Edna, who was still injured, to a gas station. He asked the owner to call an ambulance, then grabbed a can of gasoline and rushed back to the police station. However, as soon as he arrived, he was ambushed and immediately arrested by the waiting police officers. Seeing the gasoline in George's hands, the sheriff quickly assumed he was trying to destroy evidence and even claimed he had already sent the bodies to the hospital. But what the sheriff didn't know was that Katie's husband had turned into a zombie. Upon hearing this, George realized things were about to get much worse. The hospital was full of bodies, and if the zombies revived them all, the consequences would be unimaginable. Despite George's explanation, the sheriff dismissed him as a liar and insisted he was the murderer. To prevent things from escalating, George seized the opportunity when he was taken to the restroom and made a quick escape. However, when George arrived at the gas station to find Edna, he learned that she had already been taken to the hospital by the station owner. Left with no other choice, he had to head to the hospital himself. Little did he know, just as he feared, the dead zombies that had been sent to the morgue had attacked the staff inside. The bodies in the morgue were also revived by the zombies and soon began wreaking havoc throughout the hospital. Meanwhile, Katie, having learned that her sister Edna was at the hospital, asked the doctor to take her to visit. Both of them were completely unaware of the chaos happening inside. As they were about to step into the elevator, a few zombies appeared behind them. Katie quickly stepped into the elevator to escape, but one of the zombies grabbed her by the neck. The doctors outside fought back, but none of them managed to escape. Soon, Katie, now turned into a zombie, walked into Edna's room, unaware that her sister was there. Edna had no idea what was happening until Katie, holding a scalpel, suddenly attacked her. Already injured, Edna was stabbed several times. She managed to escape from the bed, but just as she was about to leave the room, a few more zombies blocked her at the door. Meanwhile, George finally drove to the hospital. As soon as he stepped inside, he was met with a scene of utter chaos. After lighting a torch and taking down one of the zombies, he rushed straight to Edna's room. He found Edna lying on the floor, barely alive. Using the torch to eliminate the zombies in the room, George was able to rescue Edna. However, it didn't take long for George to notice something was wrong with Edna's eyes. Sure enough, she had already turned into a zombie. Struggling desperately, George managed to break free and shoved Edna into the flames. Unfortunately, just as this happened, the sheriff arrived and witnessed the entire scene. Without saying a word, the sheriff immediately shot George dead. It was a tragic and unjust end for George, who really couldn't catch a break. However, the sheriff wasn't done yet. He even mocked George's death as he stood over his body. In the final moments of the story, the sheriff became a hero for solving the big case. Little did he know, his words were about to come true. The machine that caused all the chaos had been repaired and was back in operation. Later that night, after celebrating his success at a banquet, the sheriff returned home, feeling a strange chill down his spine. When he turned around, he froze. Coming out of the shadows was a zombie, and it was none other than the resurrected George. The story ended with a chilling twist.